Hi all, thank you for joining us today for our second LTX Connect live activation. LTX Connect is bringing Latinx leaders across sectors together to have the intersectional, intergenerational, and multicultural discussions we need to be having now in order to be reimagining our future in our terms. In this webinar, we'll be diving into the personal journeys of executives navigating opportunities while also defying statistical odds to not only become the first, but in many cases the only, but hopefully not the last. Especially as we look at the data regarding the lack of C-suite representation of Latinx across the board in industries, it's really staggering because it's so low. Specifically, Latinx tech founders are less than 0.5% according to 2017 data point. However, we know that that's starting to change in an upward trend, which is great. Yet Latinx tech venture capital investors still hover under 1%. With Latinas being the least represented. There's only a handful of Latina venture capital partners in the US, and today we're bringing you two of them. So for this discussion, we're going to be featuring Jomayra Herrera, partner at Reach Capital, alongside Joshua Encarnacion, who's the leadership development consultant and former CEO of Auco and head of people at Career Karma. They are going to share a little bit about their journeys for being trailblazers for their generation in the world of tech. They will also share about their family, their upbringing, the hard decisions that they had to make along the way to really invest in their career, in their dreams, but while also being able to navigate these new pathways and being the first and only ones, but again, not the last. So yet wherever Jomayra and Josh are at, personally, I know that it's always going to be a good time, a fiesta, because you have such an amazing Puerto Rican and Dominican pride and energy through and through. So get ready for a really, really fun discussion, but also a deep dive into navigating what it takes to fill your full Latinidad in the workplace and what does that even mean. After the discussion, we will then close with a session highlighting a special organization that's creating pathways for more Latinx to enter venture capital. So we'll have a little bit of time with María, Salamanca, partner Unshackled Ventures, to share a little bit more about what Latinx VC is doing. So let's introduce our hosts and speakers for today. Joshua Encarnacion is a Dominican-American, proud Afro-Latino with his heart set on growing and helping people grow into their full potential. He's helped build 3 tech startups, worked in training and recruiting roles for big tech companies such as Uber and Google. Born in Manhattan, New York, raised in Lawrence, Springfield, Massachusetts, Josh has nothing but love for his folks and the people he's met along his journey. He's a lifelong learner consisting of a lot of sports. He loves math, reading, bachata, and café bustelo. Throughout his career, his service a lot of different organizations, including Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, Airbnb, Netflix, so many to name, as well as community organizations such as Code 2040, Hack the Hood, Latinas in Tech, Tequeria, and so many other more. He's coached people through various challenges and has helped them grow into emotional intelligence, getting the high performance habits that are necessary to be successful professionally and personally. Joining Josh is Jomayra Herrera, the newest partner at Reach Capital. Jomayra has built a reputation for being a future of work expert investor. Jomayra has experience working in early stage and growth stage companies, both as an investor as well as an operator. She is incredibly passionate about partnering with entrepreneurs to help them grow and scale their companies. So if you have a startup, these are the folks that you want to be connecting with. Jomayra, prior to Reach Capital, was a principal at Cowboy Ventures, as well as an investor at Emerson Collective. Even before becoming a VC, Jomayra worked at Bloomboard, an early stage education tech company where she focused on customer success and growth. Jomayra is a Florida native, loves to get away to the beach and be with family. She's also a double degree Stanford alumni and a Forbes 30 under 30 for venture capital. So with that said, let's welcome both of them and let's get the session started.
Jomayra.
Hello.
So you're changing jobs. Mm-hmm. That was so humble. That was so humble. You're changing jobs. Can you walk me through how you got to this point with this change in jobs? Because I feel like I haven't had the chance to actually catch up with you and ask about, that transition. And obviously we shared that the last time we saw each other was before the pandemic. So perfect to catch up.
Yeah. So I guess for context for people that will be listening to this, I recently, I was formerly at Cowboy Ventures, which is a generalist seed stage fund. And I just transitioned to be a partner at Reach Capital, which is a fund focused on investing in companies within education and the future of work. And it's funny because I've known Reach since basically my first day in venture. I got to know them back when I was at Emerson Collective. We were LPs in the fund.
How long ago was that?
What?
How long ago was that when you started?
About 5, maybe 6 years ago.
That's pace. Sorry for it, but that's pace. 6 years. Okay, so we're here at Reach.
So I got to know them at Emerson. We were LPs in the fund. We were also co-investors in multiple companies. And I've always loved the team for a variety of reasons. One, the diversity on the team. They show that you can have a diverse women-led fund and be incredibly successful in terms of fund returns. I also appreciated just how kind and thoughtful and empathetic they were. And I think part of it has to do with the fact that they have more people with masters in education than MBAs on the team. And so there was just like a deep level of understanding of how to work with people and support people and just be super thoughtful. And I've always admired that about them. And so over the pandemic, I think as most people experienced, you have time on your own, you have time for yourself, and you do a lot of reflecting in that time period. And so that's what I did. And I loved being at Cowboy. I felt like it was a great team and I learned a ton, but I kept feeling like this nagging feeling of life is short and every day that you spend matters, right? How you spend it matters. And I got into venture not because I care about deploying capital to like random companies that may or may not be, incredible successes. I joined venture because I cared about deploying capital towards issues I cared about. Right. And as I was reflecting on that, Reach has always been focused on the sectors that I care deeply about. It is a team that I've known and admired very deeply. And so when the opportunity arose to join, they had just raised their Fund 3 and announced it. It just felt really natural, honestly. It was probably one of the easiest decisions I've ever made. And I've now been there for a month and I'm really happy. So that's how it happened.
Happy for you. And I guess the underlying theme there is those relationships, right? Because you kept up with everyone since your time at Emerson Collective. How do you juggle that? I mean, given all the trade-offs I'm sure you had to make, right? Like 6 years with this type of pace, I'm sure there's like a lot of things that you felt like you didn't have the time for. So how do you keep relationships, produce at the level that you do, and also, be Jomayra, which everyone loves?
I definitely made a lot of trade-offs early on, in my career. I spent a lot of weekends in offices, a lot of nights working, what I think normally other people would use time to like spend time with their friends and go out with their friends and, develop like romantic relationships, all of those things. I think I put some of those things on the back burner for better or for worse, right? It was to the benefit of my career, but also now I'm having to actually work on all those personal things that I've delayed for so long. And so it wasn't easy. Like it required trade-offs and I was very aware of the trade-offs that I was making. The one thing I will say that has helped is the people that are closest to me are people that are also working in my industry in some way, shape, or form. And so, for example, my best friend, who I've known since high school, literally we went to high school in Orlando and then came to the Bay Area together post high school. She works in venture. And so it makes it really easy to spend time with her because we're going to the same dinners and happy hours and the same events. And so I don't feel in that case I'm making a trade-off because in in a lot of ways, we're experiencing that together. And it makes the experience actually a lot easier and a lot better. So I found a way to mix my personal background with the work that I do every day. I would ask the question of you back, actually. How do you manage it? And because I know you also have you care very deeply about your family the way that I do, and you have lots of friends. And so how did you manage, to become a CEO and also maintain all these relationships?
A lot of therapy. I cannot understate that at all.
I should have said that, by the way. I also have done quite a bit of therapy myself.
Listen, just being honest and confronting the parts of myself that I feel like I try to hold on to feel like I'm not losing myself. But I mean, more concretely, right? It's just a matter of priorities. And for me, I think in the same ways that I'm hearing in your story, I know what I wanted to do. And really that was learn about ways to help people learn faster. Mm-hmm. That to me was always the way I seen problems being solved growing up. My mother, like your mother, had me really young. And from her having me at 15, 16 years old through to her early 30s, I saw her go on to get a GED and then 2 master's degrees. So I was in master's classes when I was 9, 10, 11, 12. And that pace, that's the reason why I called it out. Just that learning curve was just so normal. I mean, I think people call it growth mindset now, right? But really it was just you have to do it. You have to pick up the book, read the book, make the time for it. And then after, if you want to go perrear, go to a club, do what you have to do. But right, when the task is in front of you, make sure that it happens. I mean, similar to you, keeping up with relationships from different companies that I've been at has been a priority as well, just because I don't want those people to feel like we had a touch point and then never see each other ever again. It feels so transactional. And also our cultures, that's not how we roll. Once we connect forever. But
it's so true. And I'm actually glad that you framed it that way, because I still some of the people that I'm closest to professionally are actually folks from my Emerson days, right? And honestly, they've made a massive difference in terms of my career. And I'm talking about this is now 6 years later. The people that I was calling up when I was thinking about joining Reach, negotiating my offer, were the Emerson folks. And they answered every single time. And they helped me out. And a lot of it came from the fact that when I left, it was never meant to be transactional. It was we worked together. We worked really hard, and we were grinding together, and we spent late nights trying to figure things out. And all of those things matter. And that's the type of environments that I actually like to be in, where these relationships that we're building are not ones that are transactional, where it's hey, we work together. Okay, cool. I'll never see you again. That doesn't feel comfortable or right to me. Figuring out the balance is always important, because someone actually, one of my former colleagues told me, don't ever call your work people your family, because that's dysfunctional. You wouldn't fire your, sibling for not doing their job. You would fire someone for not doing their job. And so it's trying to kind of figure out the right balance.
I like that word, balance. Actually, earlier when you were talking about how some of the firms you worked on really prioritize diversity, I cringe a little bit, because that word kind of triggers me in so many different ways. I love hearing the word balance in place of it, because I feel like that's often what's missing. Balance in teams, balance in organizations, right. Balance in perspectives. But bringing that to more of a personal sense, and just how we show up as people, balancing ourselves through these careers, has been something that's forefront of mind for me through the pandemic. Which brought me to Massachusetts, trying to balance out this ambitious mindset with keeping up with family. Is that what the reason why you're moving back east, right?
Yeah. So I've been in the Bay now for 10 years, and the Bay is a very special place. And I'm so glad I was there early on in my career. But my family, as you know, is in Florida. And during the pandemic, I actually, in December of 2020, I came back to Florida And I was like, look, I'm going to break my lease. I'm going to come back to Florida. And this is kind of a once in a lifetime opportunity to spend a material amount of time with my family and work remotely. And it works out really great. And so I did that. And I can't tell you how wonderful it was to be home on a Tuesday and have family dinner. I haven't done that in forever. If I'm being totally honest, family dinner was not really a thing growing up anyways. But like now that we're all stable and in better places in our life, it is becoming a thing. And it was so wonderful. I loved it. And the idea of going back to the Bay and losing that ability and just like being even in the same time zone as my family felt like too much of a sacrifice at this point. It felt okay when I was younger, but at this point, it doesn't feel as great. I think I've gotten a lot of what I needed to get from the Bay Area. And at this point, I'm ready to just really reprioritize the things that I know matter deeply to me. And so, yeah, I'm planning on moving to New York. Moving to New York is about balance. It's finding a right balance of New York is wonderful from a career and ambition perspective, right? Like we have a tech and metro community here. And to be honest, like we're more heterogeneous in terms of types of industries here, which I think is a value add. But I'm still in the same time zone as my parents in a 2.5-hour flight. So
Right.
that balance.
I'm 2 miles away from my mom, and me and her, grew up through a lot of life together, given the fact that she had me so young.
Yeah.
You like dancing bachata at dinner on a Tuesday night, like everything I need, like being able to listen to Anthony Santo, everything I need, drinking like real Café Bustelo, like made by my mother, like,
yes,
just those are the things that, you can't replace. And although the Bay Area offers like advancement opportunities, like crazy, you don't get that same sense of cultura. But I think that's a little bit unfair, having learned from some of my friends from the Bay Area and just some of the relationships I had there. It's so interesting because you're from Florida, you find it in Florida, right? And because I'm from Massachusetts, I find it in Massachusetts, especially Springfield, Mass. A lot of people are like, why are you in Springfield, Massachusetts? But this place is predominantly Puerto Rican, Black, Dominican. There's a lot of people here that look like me, which most parts of the world you can't find unless you're in the Caribbean.
Yeah. I went and I spent some time in Miami during the pandemic. A lot of people kind of spent a few months there. And a friend of mine said it really eloquently, where he was like, the difference between the Bay Area and Miami is when you're in the Bay Area, the people that look like us are cooking or cleaning and in service oriented roles. In Miami, the people that look like us are the mayor, are the lawyers, are the doctors, and may also be in service roles. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. But it's all types of backgrounds and roles, and you're not like immediately placed into a certain category. And that stuff matters. Yeah. Like it really matters. I don't know if you watched Into the Heights over the past weekend, but I did. And the story of Nina Rosario, who is a Puerto Rican from Washington Heights, goes to Stanford, resonated more than you can even imagine. But there was a point that really, really hit me hard, which is when she describes that she went to a diversity dinner at the dean's house, and one of the people that were at the dinner, I'm assuming a trustee or whatever it might be, shoved like a dirty plate to her, assuming she was the wait staff. I cried in that moment because that has happened to me before in the Bay Area. And I remember actually distinctly being at a work event that, our employer was hosting. And I was like wearing like a normal dress in heels. It was clear that I was attending the event. And yet an older white woman just gave me her dirty glass. And I was like, I don't know what you want me to do with this. I am clearly here attending the event. I don't know what you want me to do with this. And it's those moments the way that I have felt it over the past few years, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. Like it's those little moments that demoralize you and that just kind of like create that extra barrier for you when it just makes it hard. And so I don't know how I ended up here, but I feel that less when I am surrounded by people that look like me and where I'm in a place that, again, to go back to your word, like has some level of balance.
No, and I'm glad we landed here, and the way that you brought it up, thank you for doing so, because obviously there's a lot of pain in that, and you've been working through that. But the way I've learned to formulate it in my head is like racism on the West Coast, at least in the bubble that we experience, because obviously we're talking about specific industry, Stanford, tech, investing. That's not the entire Bay Area, right? Like you have communities in Jose that are thriving in Oakland. You have like communities in different pockets that represent what the world does look like and feel like outside of these, you know, super Eurocentric environments. But a friend helped me think through this, and it's really like on the West Coast, I experience racism as an afterthought. It's almost like, what are you? Whereas on the East Coast, if I experience racism, it's like, no, we know what you are. We just don't. I just don't know which one's worse, but I've definitely felt that.
I totally agree. And I think another way I've heard it be said, it doesn't have to do with racism specifically, but like in the West Coast, people are nice, but not kind. And in the East Coast, people are kind, but not nice. I very much feel that way. And I actually prefer, if you're gonna be racist to me, like be straight up about it, because then we're fighting on the same level, right? Like at that point, I can call you out and I can be like, hey, you're a racist. Like step back. I actually hate the insidious underground racism that happens as an afterthought where people do it in an unconscious way, because we're not fighting the same game at that point. Like at that point, I almost feel like I'm being gaslit because I'm saying like, hey, what you did was racist. And you're like, no, you can come up with a million excuses. Like, no, I didn't know. Oh, like, I'm so sorry. I just thought you were the wait staff. Like, apologies. I would never have done that if I didn't know. Like, right. Like at that point, you're just fighting a different fight. And then you kind of get like the fragile white woman tears and you're like, okay, I just let me let it go. And they make you feel bad for rightfully being upset. And so I'd rather you just like, if you don't like me because of the color of my skin, or whatever it is, just call it out. Call me out, and like we can have a true conversation there. So
I hear you. I mean, to the fragile white woman tears, I mean, I've also seen like white male entitlement where they think you should be their therapist at all points of the day. So it's interesting because even with this lens of sexism, and we could take it to every lens, like there's so much there that's layered into people wanting to compete and, you know, labeling it as unconscious, but how unconscious is it? I feel like we're pretty aware of some of these challenges.
So I totally agree.
I feel like a lot of this is coming out of the fact that, you know, as a proud Puerto Riqueña, right, you want to be able to show off the culture and that express that Latinidad in ways that in some of these roles you're not necessarily seeing. Homage to the Heights movie, where we can see actors that are living through not just their struggle and pain and trauma, which is typically how we're portrayed in the media, but like their aspirations, their dreams, and like, you know, revisiting those mantras like Paciencia y Fe, where we actually like push ourselves to do more. But I want to take it to the point of like thinking about, you know, competition and collaboration, which I feel like that conversation is not had enough, especially at the levels that you're at, because a lot of people aspire to be, you know, a partner at a venture capital firm, you know what I mean? Or a CEO or ex-CEO, whatever that means. But like, how do you navigate, you know, this constant, incessant, like feel of people wanting to compete with you just because you're doing good work, even though you might intend to do it to help, but everybody wants to push you to places where you see the ugliest sides of you know, human nature, and completely move past the fact that we're trying to build not just for ourselves, but for our cultures, for our communities, like for the islands that, you know, produced our family lines and our blood in a collaborative way. Like, how do you move past that? How do you move through that? Knowing that people are still going to be people. They're going to want to compete. They're going to want to fight. They're going to want to take, pull, right? Like use all sort of descriptors to put you down and stop that momentum, even though you're trying to fight for something bigger than yourself.
Yeah. The only competition I see is myself. Like I am constantly competing against myself and competing on like being a better version of myself. And I don't say that like I'm not trying to say that in a tooting my own horn way or like trying to seem overly cocky or whatever. I've actually always believed this, and this has been true even when I was a young girl. Like, I'm always just trying to like beat my last personal record, right? Like, I don't really view like other people as competition. And to be totally honest, I think part of that comes also from, at least in venture, people assume everything's zero sum. And that's just not true. Like, that is a myth that we have told ourselves, that things are zero sum, right? Like, there can always be more venture firms. Like, there are plenty of LP dollars out there. There are plenty of deals to be done. There are like, of course, not every firm is going to hire a bunch of people, but like, there are ways that we can think about bringing everyone up that is not zero sum. And so I rather think of things as like, hey, I'm going to focus on myself and focus on kind of pushing myself forward and then bringing other people with me. And either you're with me or you're not, right? Like, if you don't want to like collaborate, if you don't want to work with me, fine. I don't take it personally. I don't care. Life is too short to like worry about those things. I'm more worried about what my North Star is, which is to provide for myself, my family, and make my community materially better from what I experienced when I was growing up. And if it's not falling in that category, like, it's just not worth the concern. I don't know. What about you? What do you think?
No, that's that Nina spirit. I mean, it was funny watching her in the movie. Like, Lin-Manuel portrays her perfectly in the sense of like, she's in her own world trying to do her thing. Even when she was in the salon and she was like, oh, I dropped out, and everybody was like, what? I could feel myself being in that salon and being like, malagradecida. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
Like, thinking to yourself, like, you have this perfect opportunity, but to your point, you're only competing with yourself. I mean, you put the question back onto me. I feel the same way. Like, there's been plenty failed relationships, failed meetings, failed projects, failed ideas, failed dreams that come from just knowing that you're evolving and growing and just trying to be a better person for yourself. And back to family. I mean, like, I think sometimes we forget that plays such a huge role, especially as Dominican man, Puerto Rican woman. We come from families that are really, really close, really tight.
Yeah.
Been through experiences in ways that most can't relate to in terms of navigating being first generation, moving through social class ranks. Like,
Yeah.
when I got hired at Google, I was in a micro kitchen for the first time. There was like free food everywhere. Oh man, I wanted to tell the story with my younger sister, but she'd be so upset. But basically, it ends up with us with 2 backpacks full of like free food in our living room, just eating everything. Because where does that happen in the world?
Totally. It's so funny you say that, because my sister actually got an internship at Google internship at Facebook. And then she also got an internship at Google. And she was living at my apartment during this internship, and she would come home every day with bags of snacks. And so I just had like endless snacks in my apartment. But I think it just comes from the fact that, I don't know, when you see so much that's available and you're like, wow, and it's the first time you're experiencing that, right? Like, this is all free and like this food is here. So you're like, let me take the most out, of this situation. And it seems normal. I think to the external person who has never experienced really like being grateful for every meal that you've had, and knowing that like that's not always a given, that will be available. I think to the external person, it seems odd, but to someone that has grown up in that environment, it's a very natural thing to do.
I think what you're calling out right now is something I wish could be addressed in workplaces, especially from the place of providing like opportunities. Having been a hiring manager, having hired on teams, I've seen a lot of what you're talking about right now, that scarcity mindset that comes from not having had anything, kind of get in the way when we're trying to work together, to that point of competition over collaboration. And it's almost as if like, all right, now we have this opportunity. We can't lose it. So we have to work harder.
Yeah. I think that also comes up, interestingly enough, I think it also comes up from a compensation and negotiation place as well. And I know that in my first few jobs, definitely felt this way, where I was like, yes, I'll take it. I'll take the job offer. I'm not even going to negotiate because one, the salary is probably more money than like I've ever seen in my lifetime. So that's one thing. And it's just a reality. It doesn't mean that that's what you're worth and what they should pay you. But for you, it might seem amazing because you're like, oh, this is more than my parents make combined right now. Right. And I am like half their age. And so there's that piece. And then the other piece of like, I can't lose this. Like I need to take this offer because, you know, it's money and like it's stable, et cetera. And I think that is just, we leave so much money on the table. I still kick myself about how much money I left on the table early on in my career, and the things that I didn't fight for. And I know, like looking back right now that I know the market comps, now that I've hired people, I know the money that I left on the table. And it makes me angry because all of that adds up, right? Like that is generational wealth. If we're not getting the money early on, like all those years where we weren't making what we're supposed to be making, it adds up and it compounds. And so I think about it all the time. And now I've learned a lot. And now, you know, I push very hard and negotiate very hard to get what I deserve based off of market comps and what I know that I'm worth. But I didn't know that early on in my career.
There's a lot of things we don't know early on in our career, especially coming from places that don't get included into these opportunities. So, I mean, like, yeah, I agree with you. Early on, I had no clue what salary bands were, even like right. What bands were or what the process was to be able to develop them. And now they're so secondhand nature after reviewing so many of them. Right. Totally. And even understanding the role HR plays and not necessarily being like the bad people as much as they are like the facilitators for a budget. Like right. That shift in thinking is so hard to grasp, especially when, again, you're coming from places that are so foreign to this type.
And you've worked in the hiring space before. And so what have you noticed or observed in terms of like, what do people not know or what questions are people not asking that you actually, and it's partially because they just don't know.
The biggest one I always see the drive is, the need to drive is the fact that your recruiter is your partner. Like I have many, 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 many friends that see recruiters as assholes, people that just are out to reject you. Yeah. And having been a recruiter, I'm like, no, I'm actually really tired and just want to do laundry. So I need to like review this resume as fast as I possibly can, get on this phone call as fast as I possibly can. So I can go, so I can go dance bachata or watch the Heights. You know what I mean? But no, definitely having that understanding that you can communicate with anyone in the process at any point. There's no barrier to doing so. If anything, you just look proactive when you do that.
Yeah.
More and same with anybody that's like looking to be part of these industries like venture capital and technology. Like how hard it is to just strike up a conversation with an investor or anybody that's accessible on the internet, really.
Yeah, it's funny because I definitely get more inbound from white and Asian men asking for phone calls and informational phone calls. And I, just for the sake of my sanity, I limit the amount of informational phone calls I take in a week. And I try to prioritize primarily Black and brown women where I can. But I very rarely get cold inbound from them. And normally what they try to do is they try to find someone that knows me that can then provide a warm intro. And I'm like, you could have just, my email is so easy to find. It's all over the internet. I put it on every single article. And I will say right now, it's Jomayra@reachcapital.com. Or you can find me on Twitter DM. Like my DMs are always open. And so it's funny, like I very rarely get women in general coming into my inbox or my DM asking for an informational phone call.
I hear like these experiences shape the way you think of yourself as a leader, and just like being able to hear you say what you prioritize in terms of Black and brown women, making sure that they have access to somebody willing to have these conversations. Like, does that make it harder for you to make some of the stronger decisions in different situations where people are not thinking the way that you do, not leading from a place of being inclusive or really trying to create that balance?
I think it depends all on the team that you choose, right? Like I am now in a place of privilege where I have had the privilege to choose the team that I want to work with as a long-term home, right? And my team that I have chosen shares the same values as me. And so when, and they understand like why I prioritize certain things or how I think about, you know, the ways I spend my time. Like, for example, my teammate Chantel, she's doing this initiative to help provide funding for emerging managers. Does that take time? Of course it does. But our team knows that that is a core value for her and for us as a whole. And so we encourage those types of initiatives and that type of work. I think that when you are younger in your career, you don't have that type of optionality, right? Like you're really just trying to like get a job and you're trying to learn. And so sometimes you might end up at a place that doesn't share those core values. And that's hard. It is. And the reality, I can't speak as much to tech, but the reality in investing is over 70% of firms don't even have a woman partner, like at all. Right? So your chances are that you are probably going to end up at a firm with an all-male partnership. And already there, like the implications of that are going to reverberate across the firm. And so you have to find a way and figure out a way to like excel in the job and in the firm, despite maybe not sharing all the same core values as your team members, but also protecting those core values that are non-negotiables for you, right? And it's a reality and it's hard. But it just the way it is right now. I am optimistic about the fact that we're seeing a lot of new emerging funds popping up that are led by people of color and women that start to share a lot of those values that we're talking about now. But it's going to be decades before that becomes a norm.
Yeah. In the same way that 85% to 90% of all leadership roles in tech are seated by men, right? Like are filled by men. Being able to change those narratives, you have to really fight, not just as, you know, a Puerto Rican woman doing her job and making space for other women, but as a Dominican man trying to interrogate his own like biases towards other men, right? Like unpacking the way that patriarchal norms are just rooted into the blood, the sangre, right?
Yeah.
It's funny because these conversations aren't all that far away from what our families talk about. I mean, my mother in specific being like somebody that really fought hard to try to push against all the competition with men that she had in her tracks, right? Like MBA, again, double master's degrees, probably all those classrooms were men. She does a great job of reminding me to continue to think about those different things, but we don't all have access to that. So I guess, I think really it comes down to being able to share that with as many people as possible. So thank you for doing so.
Yeah, I think the other thing to note is just some of the systematic things that are in place that makes it really hard for just like, I'll talk about women in general to excel. Like when women have kids, right? Like all of a sudden you're going to be out of the workforce probably for 3 to 6 months. And you literally just created a child. So you should probably support that child. And what often happens in the workplace, or at least like in venture, for example, you lose your board seats, you lose your investments, you all of a sudden start to lose momentum. You're left out of decisions that happen at the partnership level. Right. And so that creates a block in terms of continuing to excel in your career. And it's not just true in investing, it happens all across the board. We see it in banking, we see it in tech, et cetera. And so the way that we think about the workplace right now is the workplace has been built for men and by men, right? Like women being in the workforce, what has happened in the last 50, 60 years, like it's a very new phenomenon. We try to tell ourselves it's happened forever. No, like few decades. And so we still have workplaces that are built for men by men. Like the assumption is like it revolves around men's needs. And those are some of the structural things that we're going to have to start changing, because if women are like leaving the workforce because they're being left behind or they can't afford childcare, like we're never going to get to a place of true inclusion.
I hear you. And, I want to take it a bit further and talk about just even like the anti-Blackness that like layers into these conversations, right? That intersectionality around how people are not going to be included in the workforce. Take the fact that you're a woman and a woman of color. Now what does the landscape look like? I mean, if you had to say one thing to the people in positions of power that can make change in this space, what would you say? and this is me like selfishly wanting to learn as somebody that's like working on building leadership development practices to share with people.
Yeah. I'm sure there are a million different ways I can answer this question that probably will actually address some of the structural biases and issues. But I'm going to speak to my own experience, which is the biggest gift that I was ever given early on in my career is that I had managers that did not underestimate me. They would throw me in the deep end of the pool because they assumed I could float. And that was the biggest gift I could possibly get. Because I took on responsibilities and I did things that, to be quite frank, at the age that I was, should not have been doing. But they were like, we believe in you. Like, we just believe that you can do whatever you want. Like the dreams that you're dreaming are like, even like should be even bigger. And I think like that was the biggest gift, because I think that the more that people underestimate you, you start to underestimate yourself. And that just, again, compounds over time. It's a very vicious cycle. But if you're surrounded by people that are like, hey, do this, like my assumption is that you can do it. My assumption is always that you can do it. It's a very different mindset. And it gives you a level of confidence that you might not have had in yourself. And so I feel very lucky that I was given that. And actually, maybe this is like a good way of, because I know we're coming up to time, maybe it's a good way of closing. My favorite part of the movie In the Heights was the moment that Nina's dad looks at her and says, this is a moment that you're better than me. And she asks why. And he says, you can see a future that I can't see. And I think that hit home so hard. Both from like a personal place in terms of like, I think about, you know, the future that I have for myself that my parents probably never envisioned, but it's also going back to this piece around having people that believe in you so much that they see a future for you that you might not even see because they believe in you that much. And that, I think, is a key to unlocking a lot of human potential.
Thank you. You know, I've always been inspired by you, but like just being able to hear you say that and put words to what a lot of us feel, right? Like, because we're partly living the future that a lot of us want to see. Again, congratulations for being a partner at Reach Capital. Like, that's huge. $100 million plus fund. I can wait to come see you in New York so we can celebrate. I'm for sure going to play some bachata.
I look forward to it. I am ready for it.
Right, like I'm ready to get kicked out of whatever brunch I need to get kicked out of. But I think to close, I mean, it's good to note that more of these conversations between people like us, right, and by that I mean the Latino, Latina, Latinx community, talking about some of these harder things to work through, like the ambition, family, the heart, the sacrifices, the trade-offs, the sexism, the colorism, you know, things that I feel like we didn't even have enough time to address, like the failing personal relationship life that comes with a lot of these responsibilities.
Oh man, there are a million ways we could have taken this conversation.
First generation, right? Like all those things. But you're redefining leadership. And I know that's a big theme for what we're talking about here is being able to show up as yourself and do work that matters, not just for profit, but also for purpose.
Yep.
So, thank you.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Josh and Jomayra. That was just an amazing discussion. So many stories, so much of empathy, but also so relatable in a lot of different areas. So we just want to say thank you so much for sharing. And then as we transition to our closing segment, I want to introduce a special guest, María Salamanca, who's going to introduce herself real quick, and also just letting us know what Latinx VC is, and specifically, Maria, if you can share a little bit of your journey into venture, and then also your role as a partner.
Yeah, of course. That's a lot of things to cover, but I'll try to keep it short. I am Maria Salamanca. I am actually originally Colombian, which is where I was born. I moved to the U.S. when I was 7 years old. Moved to Orlando, Florida, which is kind of where I grew up until I headed off to college at Berkeley. And after that, really was went with my mind thinking I was going to go into pre-law, go to law school eventually. But when I landed in California, I fell in love with everything that was tech. And shortly after that, in my senior year, I learned a little bit more about venture capital, which is totally different from anything I had ever understood about finance, and was really excited. So I think at the time I was working for Forward.us, which was a lobbying immigration group that got started by Zuckerberg, a couple of venture capitalists, tech CEOs, Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, Dropbox founders, you name it. They're a very long list of great folks that really wanted to push for immigration reform at the time. And one of my roles was doing a lot of development, fundraising, relationship building. I worked directly with the chief of staff at the time, and so our job was to manage a lot of these relationships for the donors and the members of the organization. And so got exposed to many VCs, loved just how they thought about the world, the way that they were just these incredible critical thinkers and problem solvers, and how they were living almost 10 years ahead of most of us, and fell in love with that. So wanted to do that. Got lucky that there was a fund that was getting started that was going to focus on immigrant founders. Obviously, as immigrant myself, totally resonated with that mission and vision. And that was the first hire. It was just myself, two partners, and then an individual on the upside. And my job was to do a little bit of absolute everything, sourcing, finding companies, building a lot of the fund infrastructure. So our deal management process, diligence. So anyways, so it just ended up being a great entry point where I was able to join the fund as the first employee and just learn a little bit about absolutely everything, what it took to build a fund as well as invest. That's what I've been doing since then.
Maria, for the folks who may not be aware of what Unshackled Ventures invests in, can you share a little bit of the investment thesis, so then that way folks can learn more about?
Yeah, of course. So we invest in immigrant founders. So it's teams at the early stages that have at least one foreign-born founder or first generation, so kid of immigrant parents. We like to be the first check. So what would be the replacement of family and friends round, which is a very common term, but as we know from many immigrants, that's not the case. And so we have to be the first check to support them. And so we try to be early, and we try to focus on immigrant founders.
Great. So you're basically redefining being the new Tia, the new Tios, right?
That's right. Hopefully.
Great. So in that sense, and I mean, I want folks to get your background and understanding. Thank you much for sharing. And I know the folks who are Colombian are probably raising their flags real proud right now. To be like you representing, especially in an area where there's very, very little Latinx representation. However, you've been on the wave of changing that. So can you share a little bit more about the motivation to start Latinx VC and what it's about? What are some of the larger goals that you're all working towards?
Yeah, I mean, Latinx VC ended up really being inspired by a couple of movements that were happening in venture. In general, venture is overwhelmingly male, overwhelmingly white. And most folks come from maybe 4 schools in the country. And, I think when the numbers come down, it's less than 15% female. It's when you look at just race, it's less than 2% Black, less than 1% Latinx. If you put just like female Latinas, it's like basically a rounding error, and it rounds to 0%. So really, really terrible numbers that we're looking at. I think a couple of folks older than me who had been in the industry for a bit longer, as well as myself, we kind of just came together and said, we were really inspired by what was happening. All Raise is an organization that is focused on getting more females into venture, came after the Me Too movement. Then Black VC really did a lot of work after all things Black Lives Matter. And so it really just inspired us to change and just think through like what can we do as well for our community. Obviously we all look very different. It's much harder to spot where are the Latinx investors when you go on a firm's page, but we understood that because of that we have our own community to build as well. And so Latinx VC is really focused on 3 things. One is finding more individuals that we can get into venture, because those numbers are abysmal. They're terrible. And the second one is, how do we keep those that are already investors? Maybe they're not partners yet. And we really think deeply about retaining and making sure they don't leave the industry because we need them. And it's really hard to kind of climb the ladder, and it takes a lot of time. So every time we lose one of them, it really kind of step back. And then the last one is more on just how do we get more individuals that are Latinx to start their own fund. And so that's the focus of the organization. And we are about 50 members strong right now, and growing every day as we get more people in.
That's so great. And one of the reasons why we wanted to highlight Latinx VC, as you shared some of those numbers, were pretty much as a rounding error, but we're here to change that. And I know that Latinx VC has been also working on fellowships. So can you give us just a real quick overview of how folks can learn more about Stay Engaged? Can they apply for this? What's on deck for?
Yeah, for sure. It's just the Latinx VC Breaking into Venture Fellowship. It's meant for individuals that have typically 3 to 7 years of work experience, so some work experience, and are thinking about entering venture or figuring out how to break in. I think it's a very broad set of individuals, folks from finance, folks from tech, high growth tech companies, startups, more big tech, a little bit of absolutely. We have a couple of folks that worked in policy, education, and we are doing a class of 20 to 30 people. Hopefully we're going to do 2 cohorts a year is the goal. It's a 8-week program, and we bring a lot of our own members of the community to kind of demystify all things venture. And so, what the day-to-day looks like, how we evaluate companies, how we find startups, why startups, how the math works, why does the financing work the way that it works. Really kind of venture 101, but as well as digging a little bit deeper, and mostly just building a class of peers that can be there for each other as they all are trying to break in. And the main goal is, as other funds start to hire, this is the first place to start to look at, is, all race, Latinx VC, Black VC is one of the core groups that they kind of trust to do the vetting of really high, incredible candidates who have high potential to do and be successful in all things venture.
Great. So now you've all have learned more about Maria, have learned about Latinx VC, how you can get plugged in. So now we need you all to join us to change those numbers and actually raise it to our representation. And so with that said, I want to say thank you so much, Maria, for joining us. And if you have any parting three pieces of advice or closing thoughts, just to get us closed up for today's special webinar.
No, I mean, I think if there's individuals who are interested, who love tech, who are excited, definitely check out latinxvcs.com and join our events, join our community, and apply for the fellowship. We need a lot more of us there, and we know there's really good investors out there that don't know it yet.
With that said, thank you, Maria, and we'll be sharing more information about how to get plugged in with Latinx VC, LTX Quest, and LTX Connect, so we can all stay and continue to build on this community. So thank you all so much for joining, and we'll see you then. If you enjoyed today's conversation, then get ready for what's coming. We are excited to announce LTX Connect, a national festival for the Latinx community across sectors. It's coming September 8th to the 11th in a hybrid form, so you'll be able to enjoy this virtual experience as well as some in-person surprises. We'll be having cutting-edge conversations like the one we had today, mixed with career fair, networking, pitch competitions, and a few other in-person activations. To register and learn more, go to ltxconnect.org. And remember, with LTX Connect, what's next starts here.